So the plot against Jesus thickens. Judas has betrayed him. He has been arrested and brought before the Jewish high council, the Sanhedrin, and before the high priest Caiaphas. When asked if he is the Messiah, Jesus responds affirmatively. And Caiaphas, the high priest, goes berserk. Mark describes it this way. The high priest tore his clothes. Why do we need any more witnesses, he asked. You have heard the blasphemy. They all condemned him as worthy of death. Then some began to spit at him. They blindfolded him, struck him with their fists, and said, prophesy. And the guards took him, and they beat him. And then the Jewish authorities send him to Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor over Judea. You need to understand that Pontius Pilate was no friend to the Jews nor to the Jewish authorities. In fact, they detested him. He had shown no respect whatsoever for Jewish heritage and Jewish tradition. In fact, after coming into power, he began to plaster all over Jerusalem worship images of Caesar. And he went so far as to have coins minted with religious symbols on them. This man was no friend of the Jews, but they needed him. You see, they could Jesus, they could even condemn Jesus, but they could not put Jesus to death. And so, reluctantly, they lean upon Pilate. And they brought against Jesus two charges. One, that he was preventing the people from properly paying tribute to Caesar, and secondly, that he was claiming to be a king. And here in the 15th chapter of the Gospel of Mark, we find these two men together. Are you the king of the Jews? Pilate asked. You said so, said Jesus calmly. See how many things they're accusing you of, Pilate says. Jesus doesn't answer. If only Jesus would answer, then Pilate could justify his actions. You see, if Jesus would say, no, I've never to be king, and he would send him back to the Jews and let them handle the situation. But if Jesus said indeed that he was a king, then Pilate would have reason to have him condemned and put to death. Jesus doesn't cooperate. You have here a character study. First of all, there's Pilate. Pilate knows that Jesus is innocent. Remember what he asked the crowd when they to release Barabbas and to crucify Jesus? He said, why? What crime has he committed? Pilate had done the just and the right and the good thing. He would have let Jesus go. But there are other motives driving Pilate. Self-preservation, personal desire, position, power. And so instead of doing what is good and just and right, Pilate does the expedient thing. He sends Jesus to be crucified. Mark writes, wanting to satisfy the crowd, Pilate released Barabbas to him. He had Jesus flogged and handed him over to be crucified. One man, choosing political and moral and personal expediency, letting self-preservation and the desire for power and position drive his decision. And then there's another. He is Jesus. We know from the Garden of Gethsemane that Jesus agonizes over his impending suffering and his impending death. He does not want to die, but he is willing to die. You've heard me say that Jesus chose death, was willing to die, because he believed that some things are worth dying for. He believed that the things of God are worth dying for. He believed that the love of God for all humanity was worth dying for. He believed that God's desire that all persons be treated as children of God was worth dying for. He believed that love replacing hate and justice undoing injustice was worth dying for. He believed that God's plan for sinners finding forgiveness for sin was worth dying for. He believed that you and I are worth dying for. Agonizing over the suffering and the impending death, he is willing to go to the cross because some things he believed were worth dying for. So two men at a pivotal point in history. One has the opportunity to choose what is good and right and just, but he doesn't. Wanting to satisfy the crowd and to save himself is Jesus. And Jesus could have simply said, I've not done these things. And he would have been set free. But he believed some things are worth dying for, including you and me. The die is cast. And Mark writes, the soldiers led Jesus away into the palace, that is the praetorium, and called together the whole company of soldiers. They put a purple robe on him, then twisted together a crown of thorns and set it on him. And they began to shout to him, Hail, King of the Jews! Again and again they struck him on the head with a staff and spit on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him, then put him out to be crucified.